And once again, welcome everybody online. And I'm just going to hand straight over, I think, to Violetta and João to introduce what they're going to be talking about today. So, Violetta, go for it.
So just to introduce João, hello everyone. João is a colleague from the European University here in Portugal, in Lisbon. And as soon as I knew about his new book, Writing is Not Magic, It's Design, I knew that we have to have João here to talk about this hard topic about writing. So let's hear what João has to say. Thank you for being here, João.
Thank you for having me, Violetta. It's a great pleasure, and it's a little bit intimidating to be here. I mean, such a wonderful panel, and I'm hearing myself. No, not anymore. So welcome everybody, and it's a pleasure to see you. Although if you later on, if you participate, please let me know who's speaking because my Teams is kind of blocked, and I can't see who's speaking. I can see Derek, and I'm going to ask Derek just to share my PDF because I'm technologically incompetent and can't do it myself. Apologies for that, Derek, and thanks a lot. So again, welcome and thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure. What I'll do now is for about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, I'll briefly introduce my new book, which is basically my book because I have no previous one, so I guess it's my first, which is, again, I think the title is somewhat self-explanatory, and it's Writing is Not Magic, It's Design. And what I want to argue for today is how I think writing is still a fundamental skill today and for future times, and the book goes into that a little bit. I can't see, is everybody seeing the presentation? Because I'm not. I can only see Derek for now.
We kind of are, yeah. We're looking at the kind of front cover, João. It's
fantastic.
It's the big cover.
That's it. That's the first slide. So if you don't mind, next slide, please, Derek. And I'm sorry, I'll pay you coffee someday or lunch first. Terribly sorry. Thanks. So as a good researcher, I like to start with problems. So here we are. What was the problem? Well, maybe you'll relate, but well, when I'm teaching or when I'm supervising PhD students in design and master students in design, I noticed how hard they find to write down their thoughts, their research. This is particularly true with PhD students because, well, it's such a, normally you'll have vast amounts of data and observations and experiments, and then to synthesize that into a roughly 200-page thesis or something, 100,000 words, is a monumental task for anyone. So what we're asking our students, really, Derek, next slide, thanks, is to make an original contribution to human knowledge. Next slide, please. Well, using words. So make an original and relevant contribution to human knowledge using words, no pressure. So this is a hard task for anyone, but it's almost impossible for designers because it's basically like asking them to climb a mountain without any experience or tools. Since, as you know, designers, by the time they reach their PhD studies, have been, well, they've been working on becoming visual thinkers. They're a very good sketchers. They can diagram, they can communicate visually, and being very effective in doing so. We've been training them for years. And when the time comes to write a PhD, it's been long since they ever done any serious writing. So this is an incredible challenge for any academic in any discipline, but it's almost impossible for a designer. So I think you'll relate when the difficulties are numerous and immense. So, but it actually gets worse. So next slide, please. Because, okay, let's say PhD students, they're faced with this challenge and they think, okay, I can't really, I'm not used to this, to writing. Let me check some journal papers, some other academic theses, and to see more or less what's expected. How should I write? And why I think this is the moment where it gets really worse, where we have like a perfect storm moment. Because And here I draw on research from the fantastic Ellen Sword. She's a full professor in, well, she's an expert on academic writing from Australia, Ellen Sword. She's wonderful. And she did these empirical studies on the quality of academic writing from the point of view of how effective it is in communicating ideas, okay? So that's her work. And it's very, very insightful. So there's basically a fundamental failure to communicate across disciplines, okay? So this is not about us self-deprecating ourselves, designers. No, this is just across the board, all disciplines. There's a complete failure to communicate. So Ellen and her colleagues, she actually, so it was very interesting, her studies, because she actually asked academics in different disciplines, what criteria they consider that a good academic paper or thesis should have? What are the characteristics? And then she kind of created this matrix. Okay, this is what we expect: clarity in communication, precision, tells a story, lack of jargon, etc., etc., etc. A series of things. Okay. Then she took that matrix and she analyzed a bunch of papers from top journals, okay? And then she ranked them, and the results were atrocious. There was a complete failure to communicate. So there's this paradox. If you ask academics what they think academic writing is, good academic writing, and they'll tell you a story, and then you read what academics are writing, and it's the opposite story. It's not even a different story. It's the opposite. So I find, so it's paradoxical, of course. And it's, so the thing she found, of course, was too much jargon. There was a tendency to inflate weak ideas to become larger than they actually were. There's this tendency to say ordinary things using extraordinary language instead of saying extraordinary things using ordinary language. And all of this adds up to a kind of a style of writing which is very defensive, which is that kind of writing where you're reading it and you neither agree nor disagree with it. It's just kind of bland and doesn't really make any kind of bold statement about anything. So, okay, so perfect storm, right? These PhD students in particular, so they can't write, they have a huge challenge ahead. It should be academic, so they go to academic writing, they find very bad examples. What's going to happen? They're going to reproduce them. So it's this, they close the circle of bad academic writing. It never ends now. It's a cycle. Okay. But okay, so now that I've laid out the problem, I started to think, okay, I have to think about this differently. So next slide, please, Derek. And I completely reframed how I thought about writing, in fact. So when I started to help my students, I figured, look, they don't really need help in terms of the formality of the writing. So it's not about how do you cite references, all of that, because that's a yes or no kind of question. You just have to follow Harvard or APA or whatever you're using. That's easy. So I thought that's not the problem, actually. The problem is we have to think about writing fundamentally as a communication problem. And this changes everything. So we have to think about writing we have to put the reader front and center, right? So the writer knows something the reader doesn't. And the writer must show it using words in order for the reader to see it herself. That's it. It's a communication problem. And then I'm much more comfortable. And so are my students. We're designers. Communication problems are basically whatever we do, regardless of type of design. And so suddenly, okay, so this is something we can work with. And then I thought, it's also not about talent or magic, like I say in the book. Like when we read good writing, it's very intimidating. It's very impressive. We think, I could never write like that. And we think, okay, it's so out of reach, I'm not even going to try it. But that's a mistake, because writing is a process. It's something that you can learn. It can be divided into stages. You can learn step by step how to put a text together to get a final text that is impressive, clear, precise. So the communication problem, we must put the reader front and center, and then and then we can break it down and not think about writing as this big thing, but actually it's many things. So next slide, please, Derek. Thank you. So I very pragmatically, again, because I'm a designer, I broke down the writing processes into 4 different types of writing. And what's interesting about those is that they correspond to 4 different mindsets. So we have notes, outline, draft, and edit. And I have this quote allegedly by Ernst Hemingway that everybody seems to like a lot, so I put it there. Write drunk, edit sober. I think it really beautifully illustrates how different the mindsets are in the different stages of writing. Okay, so, and the problem with a novice writer is that she's normally trying to do everything at the same time, gather notes and figure out the structure of the text, write perfectly in the first go, and then put all the right references in the right, and that's really not at all like how the writing process advances. So particularly this distinction between the draft and the edits. So the moment when you actually put down your thoughts into words and the moment when you edit those thoughts, those are completely different mindsets. One is the novelist, the other is the engineer, okay? So the novelist just puts down everything almost in a stream of conscience kind of way, just generates a lot of content. Whereas the engineer is really looking at the structure. Let's see if the text holds. Where's the argument here? Does it have a good foundation and so on? So it's more analytical. And you can't combine these different mindsets in the same moment unless you're schizophrenic, and then maybe you can, but I think it's rather hard. So on the one hand, the book is making a very pragmatic argument, or it's providing help in a very pragmatic way, where I say, look, here's the method you can follow. And we designers, we love that. We love methods. Let's break it down. And actually, I can make a parallel between the writing process and the design process. I go into detail in the book about that. So that's very pragmatic. You can follow this, and then it's going to be easier for you to write. But then there's also, and that's very pragmatic and straightforward. But as the book advances, I start to get into more idealistic kind of advices, because I really think that the cliche is true. Writing is thinking. And if you improve your writing skills, you will improve your thinking. I mean, our thinking is very, people thinking, when we think, it's like this web. It's an explosion of emotions, memories, dreams, ambitions, fears, anxieties, stress, images, all at the same time. It creates this web. If you ever, when we're thinking, that's how our thinking goes. It's not linear like a text. It's just this web of interrelated things. And it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when you have to pin down, capture a thought, and kind of shape it like a sentence, you're really shaping your thinking into a new form. So when you write and you get good at this, at shaping sentences, you're really sharpening your thought. And so writing is thinking. And so I move towards those more idealistic kind of teachings as the book advances. So anyway, I need to wrap up. So Derek, next slide, please. So I really didn't want to turn this conversation into a discussion about ChatGPT at all. And I don't talk about it in the book because to me, to ask ChatGPT to write my papers for me, it's like asking the microwave oven to play with my kids or something. It's silly and nonsensical. Because, again, if writing is thinking on an idealistical kind of perspective, but it's also a craft, like I tried to explain when I explained the process. It's a craft. You can learn it, learn to take notes, learn to organize it into an outline, learn how to draft, learn how to edit. You can learn all of those skills. Then it's a craft, and the craft is self-fulfilling. So when we improve at writing, it's self-fulfilling. It's a good in itself, like learning how to play the violin better. You know, the process itself is fulfilling. So to me, writing it makes my thinking sharper. It's fun. I like it. So to outsource that to a machine, to me, it's completely nonsensical. And besides, do we really need, and I put this question to all of you, do we really need more papers faster? Is that the problem academia is facing right now? We just need to produce more papers a lot faster. I don't think so. We have all acted as reviewers for journals and conferences. And I think the problem is probably the opposite. We need better papers, slower, that go deeper into the issues, not a lot more papers faster. So next slide, please, Derek, and 1,000 apologies for making you do this. But that's it, really, thank you. I'm gonna pass the ball to Violeta now, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, João, for your time, for your presentation. Of course, it's not possible to capture all the richness of your book in a short presentation, but thank you for preparing this presentation to introduce the book. We'll shortly open the discussion to all the participants, but before getting there, I would like to also highlight some aspects of your book that captured my attention, and maybe also to frame our discussion next. So I would like to say that when I was reading your book, I found that many of your guidelines, in fact, I already practice them in my own practice, my own routine. But many times I try to transfer this knowledge, these practices to my students, and I was not able to do it with the same clarity because they are so ingrained in my own routines. I don't know how to articulate them. And now after reading your book, of course, I am thinking that was because I didn't try to write about them. Because as you say, writing is thinking, writing sharpens our thoughts. So it was very interesting also to realize that fact. But to give you a very specific example, and you already addressed the issue, in your book, you clearly define these different phases. And for example, you clearly explain that when we are trying to draft or the stage that you call drafting, our intention is really to write without any judgments, just let our thought flow, to fill the page and not try at the same time to edit, to refine, to judge. And this quote about writing drunk and editing sober, it's really on spot. I use these methods, if I can say it that way, a lot. I know it really works. I many times try to explain to my students what I mean by just fill the page and then editing after that, but I was not able to do it so clearly as you did. So thank you so much. I will, of course, recommend your book to my students. And the second aspect that is really interesting in your book is how you transfer the principles of design to writing in a way that design students or any designer can really understand very well. For example, taking the same example, anyone who knows something about design thinking or how designers think completely understands that we cannot diverge and converge at the same time. So whether we are trying to generate a lot of concepts or we in a different moment are trying to select them, to evaluate them, to refine them. So these concepts are completely transferable for writing. And now after reading your book, okay, it's so obvious. But the question is, we need to be aware of these similarities. And so your book really makes these links, these bridges so clear. Now, something that was really new for me, and I want to explore it in my own practice, you hadn't the time to talk deeply about it in your presentation, maybe you can now make it, was about the emphasis you give to notes, and specifically to a method that you describe in your book that you call deep notes. So I would like to ask you to start this issue of notes, because at a certain point you tell in your book that you say that you have a collection, I believe, of 2,000 notes, I believe, in your book. And at a certain point, you write, I can always rely on my collection of notes to prepare a talk or draft an article. So I am curious, what was the note you choose to prepare this talk, and why these specific notes?
Thank you, Violeta. A good question. You put me on the spot somewhat, but actually I did start the presentation, preparing the presentation with a note, which is a note that describes the difference between saying something ordinary using extraordinary language instead of saying something extraordinary using ordinary language. And my note just really emphasizes the idea that if you have a graph, at the moment where your ideas are more complex, when you're writing and your ideas are really complex, and you, again, if you put your reader front and center, you must understand that at moment of highest complexity, the language should be at the moment of lowest complexity. So the language should be clear, not your ideas, or rather not clear all the time, but in those moments, simple, because then you're really taking the reader, trying to show the reader something hard to grasp, and you need to take her into consideration. So that was the note I first picked out to start my presentation.
Yes, and we already discussed that before. This focus on the user, which is also so familiar to designers, it's really also very transferable directly to writing. But still, about taking notes, and specifically notes, you already addressed some of the issues that you usually see PhD students or master students struggle with when writing. But I would like, maybe you can expand a little more about what is notes and the deep notes method, and how do you believe it can really help on academic writing? Because your book is not specifically about academic writing, but how can this specific method help academic writers?
Well, Violeta, thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. If I extend too much, just feel free to interrupt me, because I can talk about taking notes for hours, literally. So please feel free to interrupt me, but let me try to encapsulate it in a short explanation. So notes are everything when you're researching or writing something serious, even a novel. Notes are the building blocks of your text. Okay, notes are like stand to writing, like bricks stand to architecture. It's that simple. Normally, I get the opportunity to work with first-year PhD candidates, and I always ask them, how do they take notes? And they show me their notebooks, or some of them do it digitally, but it's even digitally, it's some form of notebook where they take all their notes and so on. And then I tell them, look, you'll probably be writing down your dissertation in 4 years, maybe 5 years time, if you're lucky. When you finally sit down to write your final manuscript, how will you find that note that you wrote 4 years ago, and it's buried in one of your 12 notebooks that you have regarding your PhD? How will you retrieve that note? And they always look at me they have this blank stare, and I say, you can't. I know, because I was there before I had this method. I was also taking a lot of notes using notebooks. And so I tell them, look, that's a big mistake, and you should never take notes on notebooks. Just stop doing it immediately, because your notes should be atomic, like I say in the book. They should be one thing. So even if it's either a card or it's a digital version of what a card might be, but it can't be a continuous page by page kind of reflection, because by the end of the PhD, you'll have literally dozens of notebooks and you won't be able to find them. So you have to create a system where every note is atomized. So it's one thing that you can't divide anymore, on the one hand. But then, of course, there's the problem of retrieval. And I go into a lot of detail in the book on how to do that. But in short, to find your notes, you have to connect them. Your notes must be connected, because the notes that you take from a book chapter 2 of an important book for your research, and something you overheard in a podcast interview. Maybe those two notes are related. And when you heard the podcast, a light went on your brain and you went, oh, wait, this is what I was reading in that chapter. So you make a note about that connection and you connect both. And now everything you read, everything you hear on the lecture, what you hear in the podcast or in the discussion with your supervisor becomes interconnected with your own personal perspective, which is something, it's invaluable, this. Because one, it's pragmatic. You only have to do the hard thinking once. You make the hard connections once. You have a system where that connection is explicit and you can find it. And then when the time comes and you're writing chapter 6 of your dissertation, your train of thought has already been laid out 4 years before, okay? So the hard thinking was done once. And now you have your outline almost, because your notes are linked. And they're linked in a particular way, in a way that makes explicit your own point of view about that material. Because we don't want to read another Wikipedia article about, sustainability and design. It's not that. We need to see what you did with that material, right? When you're researching, you're adding something. And that adding has to do with your own perspective and how you're making sense of your observations, of your studies, what you're reading, and you're proposing a new perspective on that. So the notes are the building blocks of our thinking when we're writing. And in the book, I go into detail in how to create a system to do this. There are many others, okay? So, and I didn't invent it, by the way. My merit here is very, very low. I just combined things I found and try to find ways to support my own work, okay? So that was how I built this deep noting system. Like you said, it's based on other people's work, much smarter than me, and I just kind of stole their ideas and create something that makes perhaps a bit more sense for designers and a bit more sense for me. In a very small nutshell, that's it.
In fact, many people here in the chat are recognizing methods associated with deep notes and telling that they already use it, or so maybe
fantastic.
Next we can enlarge the discussion to the audience about that. Just to highlight another aspect of your book, you already talked about it in your presentation, but not so explicitly. So I found particularly refreshing that you address the issue of academic writing sometimes being very boring. Sometimes it seems like something was written to put readers to sleep. So what you suggest is, for example, that in the phase of outline, we try to break away with this very typical structure, introduction, whatever goes in the middle, and a conclusion or something like that. And you almost challenge us to try to find different narratives and by that different structures in our documents. And at that point, you suggest, for example, storytelling, which is, again, a concept very familiar to design students and designers. And again, I never made that connection. I don't know why, because it is so obvious how storytelling can really make academic writing more interesting. So I was reflecting about my own writing practices and my bigger pieces of writing. I never wrote a book as you, so my main works were the PhD thesis, and I found that I also use storytelling, and it seems that my tendency is to tell stories through analogies. So, for example, in my first thesis, I was discussing how to learn design and how thinking about the way we think when learning, it's important. And I created an analogy with a journey. So like a journey where we take the time to observe, to write notes about it, to sketch something about what we are seeing. And I think that exactly to break away with this flat structure. I try to introduce some points of interest to the reader by opening each chapter with a quote from a book not related with design, but related with traveling or related with using notebooks or drawing sketches when traveling. So that was my first attempt to tell a story. Then on my second thesis, now that I think about it, I really embraced the analogy to tell a story. So this work was about how to extract academic acceptable or valid knowledge from design projects. And so I created an analogy with the theory of light, the duality of light. Sometimes you can observe light behaving like a wave, sometimes like a particle. And I draw this parallel with the different kinds of knowledge we can extract from a design project. But anyway, I started by changing, for example, the name of the chapters. So I really went away from the classical introduction, state of the art, and so on. And I intentionally searched for words from the universe of light, like the colors, the lenses, the spectrum. Then through all the documents, I try to introduce in each section a scientific fact about light or some historical breakdown on the theory of light. So through all the document, there is this like parallel story going. So we have this first layer, which is the argumentation about design knowledge, and then the other story about the theory of light. And on my final discussion, I went to search how the theory of light is now perspectived by the community of theorists in the light field, because there are some new findings that confirm the duality and other that question the theory. So at my final reflection, I discussed how these new findings about light would change all my argumentation about design. So anyway, I believe, and I am just talking about all of that because I believe that it created something interesting to the readers, and that was also my intention, to sometimes surprise the readers, sometimes challenge the reader, or maybe making him feel like intrigued at a point, because I'm talking about the theory of light to an audience from design. So I don't know how it works for the readers, but I know how it works for me as a writer. So this is where I want to get, because you also talked about that, about fun. So my question is, when we are able to introduce this element of storytelling and center the process in the user, I mean, we are intentionally addressing our reader. We are trying to engage the reader and their emotions, trying to lead the reader or surprise or maybe amuse the reader. At that point, academic writing is not a burden anymore. It is enjoyable. That's how I feel. I want to know what do you think about it, but mostly, have you seen any of your students making this transformation from burden to joy? Have you any kind of example you want to share with us?
Violeta, first of all, thank you for sharing your story, basically, because I think it enriched the discussion, really. Sorry, answering your question quickly. Let me see. Yes, I've seen it, and it's one of those moments when we just regain confidence or not confidence. Just when that transformation happens, the joy of teaching is also rekindled within myself. Okay, so it's rare, though. I'm not going to lie. It's rare, but I've seen it. I'm thinking in particular of a wonderful student of mine, no longer student, but now a fellow colleague, Annette. She did a PhD by publication, so she wrote a bunch of papers, 5, I think, and I was lucky enough to be her supervisor. And when we wrote papers together, and the first paper came back, and it was no, not came back, came to me, and I sent it back, and it was all red ink. Okay, it was just red ink, and I just edited the hell out of that paper, and then maybe the second one as well. But there was a moment though, midway, maybe even midway through her journey, Anna, where she just she sent me her first draft, and I remember clearly telling her, look, Anna, I can't edit your work anymore because I read this and I heard your voice. And it's not like I write at all. It's a completely different style of writing. But I can't edit anymore because I don't have it would be silly to make you write like me. And I could finally hear you. I was reading it and I was hearing her voice. And her research was about how people relate with clothing. So how do we people relate with their clothes? So that it was about relationships. And she used a lot of analogies as well. And she used the analogy of personal relationships. And so she got people engaged in her research. So her participants were really telling her very deep, personal, emotional stories about anxiety, social anxiety, for instance, that women feel regarding their clothing. And those stories were incredibly personal and heartfelt. There was no way not to include those elements in her storytelling and still be able to communicate the same research results, you see. So it was a fundamental part of her writing was about that analogy. And then the personal stories that intertwined and illustrated how a theoretical analogy, which is something very abstract and high-minded, but how it impacts people on the ground. And so when I saw that, I saw the joy in her discovering her voice. And somewhere inside of me, the joy of teaching, seeing the student overcome the master in a way, was, again, self-fulfilling. It was very self-fulfilling. So it does happen. However, I must make a caveat here. It took real learning, rather, the real process of teaching and learning is hard work, and it depends on hours upon hours of one-on-one interaction. Okay, I think my book does a good job of encapsulating some ideas and maybe opening some doors, but really a deep teaching learning experience occurs across time. There's no substitute for that. Just like some of us look into how undergraduates learn how to design, and we know that there's no escaping the one-on-one moments, peer-to-peer and peer-to-teacher, and how those compound along time. So there's no one recipe, and the one recipe I know is the one that says it's going to take long, and it's going to require an investment from the teacher and the student to engage in conversation upon conversation and just improve on it and make an honest effort. Okay?
Okay, fantastic, João. In less than a minute, if you have to give just one piece of advice to a PhD student about writing.
Oh my God. You warned me that you were going to ask me that and I forgot. So I'm really on the, I know.
I can give you an hint, maybe, I don't know.
No. Let me speak off the cuff. I think one advice, yes, slow down. Slow down. Everything is speeding up. Information just arrives immediately. We're drowned in information. We have to teach more classes faster. We have to read more papers even faster. No. A PhD is a marathon, not a sprint. And you need to slow down your mind, slow down your reading, slow down your writing, slow down your eating, make time for yourself, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's all dependent on slowing down.
Thank you so much, João. Now I will hand on to Derek to manage the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic, and thank you very much, João. That was really interesting, particularly towards the end where, when you're introducing concepts like time, immersion, apprenticeship, tacit knowledge, experiential knowledge, emergence, you're basically describing Design Studio, to be quite honest with you, which might be coming to a publisher near you soon, but that's another story. So that was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to your second book. That's How to Be a parent using a microwave oven. That's going to be really, really, really interesting. But
I'm going to take a note.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I can join you with maybe the British version of how to use a fridge to be an uncle. Yeah, we could have a complete series. I'm just going to open it out because I'm sure that loads of people have got lots of questions to ask. So please, if anybody wants to ask any questions, then please shout out. In the chat, people have picked up on a few tools. I am a massive workflow geek. I've never played with Obsidian. I've kind of dipped my toes in it and tried it a few times. But I've got literally maybe 20, 30 note-taking apps on my laptop, and very few of them actually stick. So yeah, if anybody wanted to talk about, because it's something we don't talk about, the logistics of actually doing the job that we do. David Hockney wrote about this for artists, how to use a paintbrush, all of this stuff. We tend not to talk about it. Or if there's any other questions, feel free to jump in. I don't think there was anything else in the chat. There was one comment about maybe how similar it is to other methods. I'm pretty sure I read this in Umberto Eco's book. He wrote a book about how to write a thesis. He was a big believer in the library card. That was his thing. I think, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Leslie Ann, do you want to go first?
Yeah, João, I'm really excited to read your book. And I kind of just wanted to share an experience which is very related to what you're talking about. I found academic writing very painful and wrote because I had to. I wrote a non-academic book that was published last year and worked with a really good editor who actually said maybe a lot of the things that you said, because she knew that there was a book inside of me, right? And I spoke about this with some academics sometime. I said it's really interesting writing with someone who wants you to write and wants you to be successful versus writing for the journals that maybe, the journals seem to have a different kind of mindset, like, okay, let's make this person suffer. And, so my editor talked about things like, she didn't talk about drunk writing, but I literally sat and wrote my book in 3 weeks and it was like drunk writing. And then we spent 6 months to a year editing. What else was it that you said? There were a few other things. It's really just about maybe empowering the writer. And that's what I'm hearing you talk about. But I had not experienced that before working with the editor that I worked with. So I just I'm glad that you've put this stuff into a book to help people think about it like that. Oh gosh,
Well,
Derek. Yeah,
Leslie,
it was a long hangover. Yes.
Thank
Sorry,
you for
João,
sharing
go
your story,
ahead.
Leslie. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing the story. I think it's inspiring for any students that might be listening. You can write your thesis in 3 weeks. Sorry, that's bad advice. But it was very inspiring. And I think there's another theme emerging here, which is the book basically is just stating the obvious. So I guess somebody had to do it.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Joe. And I think I'll come to Maria next, if that's okay. Maria,
Hi.
go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much. This was excellent. I have the good fortune of being, my spouse is a writing teacher, but the bad fortune of never listening to him. So the things about storytelling were amazing, and I am starting to do that. And so I appreciate having you as an example. I want to ask you, as I teach, as I work with my students to write, I've heard so many times that I'm not a writer, I can't write. How do you respond to your own students in those
Thank you so much.
scenarios?
Thank you. That's spot on, that question. I like to keep things at a human level. So immediately I point them towards my direction. I tell them, look, you have no idea how much I suck at writing. That's what I tell them. I suck hard. So I just have to write a really, really, really terrible first draft. And then I work on it for weeks. That's what I tell them. in order for you to read something passable for me, you have no idea how many weeks have gone into that final piece of writing. So I try to demystify the idea that your supervisor, your teacher, your professor is this perfect, enlightened, talented person that is able to do things off the cuff and just write perfectly at first time. I just say, no, it's the opposite. I have zero talent. I have no talent for writing. And because I'm aware of that, I just work really hard at it because I know I'm going to suck for a very long time until it's possible. So I try to make it very human and tell them that, look, don't confuse the final result with the process, okay? And the process just takes some time. And that's my answer. It's my template answer. It tends to work.
I'll maybe just bounce back to Maria here, just if you wanted to respond to that quickly, Maria, because I know it's
yes, actually. Do you have any strategy for helping them find joy in writing? Like writing together, body doubling, anything like that?
Good question. You put me on the spot. I don't think I've ever reflected on that, but I will. Let me think. I think.
Could I jump in with an example on that?
Sorry, yes, please do. No, I just thought there's one thing I tell them, and I exaggerate a bit, but it's part of our job to be a bit rhetorical sometimes. So I tell them, I try to give them a romantic perspective as well. I tell them, look, find a spot that's really beautiful near your home or home office or school, and go there to write when you need to. Something near an ancient library or a coffee shop you like, or a garden, something that's your surroundings also matter. And just picture yourself writing in that environment, and then just build this romantic idea of sitting down and writing in this beautiful place. That tends to at least lean them towards the path of joy. Although joy is another emerging theme, and I will be reflecting about that. So thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to think about it.
Cool. Michael, I'll come to you next if you want to.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Can indeed.
Okay, works. Very nice. So it's more of a comment than a question. So for the past 20 years, the design students, PhD students, always say, why is writing, or ask, why is writing like pulling teeth all the time? Yeah. And so what I've begun, and I was really lucky because when I started my PhD, I got these courses from Mike Press and Rachel Cooper, and they said, write inclusively, get into writing early, write so everyone can understand. And so the barrier was very low, but it's still, why is it like pulling teeth? And so I think you have to, and I was lucky to attend workshops by Rowena Murray. And she also has this low barrier. It's wonderful. She says, write something every day. Don't take care of the style. Make it habitual, even if it's just 10 minutes. And so this is what I'm trying with my bachelor students. So I realized, so if I want PhD students that are not terrified of writing, I have to start with small writing exercises. 5 minutes writing reflections in your journal. What have we done today? What was my role in it? And so on with the first year students at the end of a seminar. And so step by step. So it's not, no one's going to look at it. Don't worry. Yeah, it's only for you. And so step by step, we try out different styles of writing, like the letter to the grandmother. And so kind of habitually, I try to guide my students in a direction where writing, as designers who work with sketches and charts and so on, and drawings, that become writing becomes more natural to them. And I'm still struggling, and it's every semester is new, but I think sometimes it sticks, and sometimes the essays are really so good, they are presenting it to the school.
Wonderful.
So that's my comment, yeah.
Cool.
So I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you, Michael. And you have no idea how envious I am of you having studied with Rowena Murray. But Wonderful piece of advice, by the way. I think I'm getting more out of this session than all of you. So I took a note about that because I do struggle with how to indeed demystify the writing for my students and how to make them understand that this is a joyful, fun activity, not at all like pulling teeth, but it's breaking it down into shorter exercises like that helps. I don't think I've ever done that. I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud because you're just making me reflect on my own practice. I guess the difficulty there, Michael, is that they're making us, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but we have to teach more and more hours every semester. And I'm finding my main difficulty is finding the time to really dedicate myself to my students. And that's the real struggle, because then I have to make everything very efficient in class. And that's where I'm struggling, actually. But maybe that's a discussion for another time.
Definitely. I think we'll maybe take another couple of questions rather than jump in. But yeah, I'm a big fan of these like different sort of little mini writing techniques, like writing for different audiences. We used to do both actually, João, when we did the first Bite book. We would go to weird places, like we went to Edinburgh Zoo, and then we did a series of writing for romantic fiction, cowboy and western. There was a whole bunch of like genres that we wrote for or rewrote for, and it gets you over the hump. It gets you into the doing thing. Like the similarities between this and designing are just astonishing. They really are for me. But yeah, Randall, do you want to jump in and ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with a little story of my own. I was sort of facing a writing challenge, let's put it that way. So in my usual fashion, I did some research on, writer's block and stuff like that. Anyway, I ran across a couple of articles on the idea that some writers, like to use an outline, and then there are other writers who just don't, and there's a word for it. They call it pantsing, right? That word particularly has two different meanings, but point being, that sort of like turned on a light bulb for me. And your comment about, good writing being a network, and our thinking about being a network, it occurred to me that instead of trying to put all my ideas into a line, like in an outline, why don't I try a circle, right? And as think of it as a network, right? So I did this, I put the theme in the middle, right? And all around the edges, I tried to put the ideas, what connects that theme together. And it was like magic, it's like it started to click, like anything that didn't have to do with that theme, kick it out, right? And after a while, I actually had a good basis, what I felt for writing. But it's always this back and forth between, developing your theme and the ideas around it and how it all connects together. And, the fractal parts, that bring out all that detail. So anyway, have you found any kinds of exercises like that that start to help visualize your whole set of ideas?
Yes. Sorry, I'm eager to jump in, because yes, that's one exercise I actually do, which is when I'm teaching the outline phase, is precisely to show that it's not a line at all. And since my students are designers, we just diagram and we experiment different structures for their papers or their thesis chapters, whatever we're working on, and we just sketch it out just with paper and pen, just different diagrams. Sometimes indeed, let's put it like a mind map, put the theme on the middle and then just branch out. Other times we do something else. Sometimes it's a central line, which is the theme, and then there are these anecdotes that float around it. we try a lot of different visual outlines, and that really gets them out of a lot of writer's block situations. And I think it's a closer match to indeed our thinking structure, because we don't think linearly. So let's see how are you connecting these dots, and that connecting matters, the individual connecting that you're doing, because it's your thinking. And so we try to put that on paper on small thumbnail sketches. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, and
Yeah.
But I think what the key for me here was kind of this idea of going back and forth. Like in one state, you're just sort of free forming, and in another state, you're just being much more deliberate and logical, right? So that that is very much aligned with with the idea of like the the design process is convergent and divergent thinking. So you just have to let yourself do those kinds of activities in the way that they want to be done. Yeah.
Correct.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I think I maybe saw James's hand up, but I think James might have had to go quickly. So unless there's any other sort of questions from anyone, any last very, very quick questions, then I think we'll maybe wrap it up at that, because that's given us a lot to think about, João. Thank you very, very much. It was really interesting. And again, I can only repeat, for me, it really, really emphasized just how similar to the design process it is, that kind of halfway space between certainty and uncertainty, ambiguity and convergence, if you want to think of it that way. So thank you very much for painting that lovely story for us.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody for engaging. And again, thank you for having me. It's been intimidating but fun, just like writing.
Not at all. Oh dear. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording in just a second. As I say, the next event is on, let me check the date. It's our very own Leslie Ann Noel with members of OCAD-U, I believe. The team there are going to have some interesting reflections on the sort of practices at OCAD. Is that right, Leslie Ann?
Yes, we're going to be talking about some advertising classes that people transform. It's like they didn't want to say decolonizing advertising because they think that that's too big of a term, but it actually, that's what they were trying to do, to use a decolonial lens for some of our advertising courses. So we'll be chatting about that.
That sounds really interesting, actually. Okay, so that's on the 13th of December. Link in the chat for that. But as I say, you can find all the events on the DRS Eventbrite. As I say, we'll get the 2024 events on there over the next few weeks for the next series. But in the meantime, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming along. And João, once again, thank you very much for that. It was really interesting. I'll make the recording available as soon as I can this afternoon. And see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody.